All right, everybody ready? Ready in the back there? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are convening the special meeting of the Board of Directors. It is June 21st at 6:30 in the p.m. We will start with the, well, I will actually, if it's okay with everyone, stuff, since it's just a budget workshop, but we will do the roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, President Young. At this time, I'll take an oral roll call and request that each board member respond with present when their name is called. Director Garcia.
Present.
Director Hawkins.
Present.
Director Moore.
Present.
Vice President Jenkins.
Present.
And President Young.
Present.
All board members are present, and Director Garcia is via Zoom. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. That takes us to public participation. Have we received any public participation?
No, we've not received anything via email, in person, via Zoom. I don't see any raised hand icons.
Okay, if anyone's on Zoom and wishes to address the board, please either raise your hand or unmute yourself at this time. Okay, not seeing any. We will go ahead and close public participation. We have one item for discussion, which is the fiscal year 23-24 proposed operating budget, and I will turn it over to our general manager.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be introducing this item tonight, and thank you all for attending. I know this has been an especially long day for some of you already, maybe all of you. So, but we do have an interesting, important, and I think well-composed presentation coming to you from Bill to fuel some critical dialogue on our proposed operating and capital budget. And ultimately, we're seeking board approval of the budget, the org chart, and the salary schedule. The proposed budget was presented to Finance Committee on May 24th, and it was recommended that we bring it forward to the full board for your consideration. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill. It's all yours.
Very good. Thank you, John. Appreciate it very much. What we end up with is each department then makes a submittal, and that ends up becoming a preliminary budget. That preliminary budget is then goes through what we call a challenge session, and that challenge session goes through each one of the department heads meets with the general manager, Jose, and myself, and we go through a challenge session on items to make sure that anything that's being put into the budget is defensible, something that they believe that they can accomplish during the upcoming year. After that group is happy with the results, the GM will then make an approval on it, and the next step after that, it goes to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee receives a presentation as well as all the detailed worksheets. From there, there is a extensive review process, lots of discussion, and then if it passed the muster, then the next step would be to go on to the board. That's where we are tonight, is asking for you to review the proposed budget. We're prepared to make any adjustments that come up tonight in the presentation. So we hope this is an interactive process. So if there's things that we feel that need an adjustment, either up or down or reclassification, we can take care of that this evening. If successful tonight, we would then have a budget adoption by the board, and then we would end up being able to distribute that, and we distribute it to our stakeholders, including our bond agent. It's one of the requirements to have a budget, and if we don't have it, they come back and we're out of compliance with our bond issue. We also have to send our budgets to San Bernardino County and Riverside County because we operate in both jurisdictions. We place our budgets on the website for all the stakeholders, our citizens, as well as other interest parties to see it. And then finally, each year, the district submits our budget to 2 different outside organizations for external review and critique. We do that in the hopes that if there's areas where we can make improvement, they identify that for us, and we also are seeking an award. There are 2 awards, one provided by the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA. The second is by the CSMFO, California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. I'm happy to say last year that we won both awards. We're hoping that after we get through this process tonight, we'll submit it, and then if there's ways that we can make improvements, we definitely are looking for that. So that's pretty much our budget process, and we wanted to share that with you so that you know that it's been seen by several sets of eyes. Going on to the next slide is our budget development factors. In putting the budget together, we have what are called assumptions. This is just a list of some of the assumptions that we use. We want to make sure that we have a well thought out process. For example, customer growth. We have already enlisted a consultant for our long-range financial plan and rate study, and in that, our customer growth was pegged by the consultant to be 2% a year. That adds up between 400 and 500 new connections each year. That's what they're projecting in our service territory. Our property tax growth is pegged at 2%, following the maximum that's allowed. Our investment earnings this year, we've included as an assumption that we're going to make between 4 and 5% on the excess reserves that we have, and that should equate to between $2 and $3 million. So we've made all these budget assumptions. We just wanted to let you know that these have all been embedded in it, and if you have any other questions on any of it, we can definitely get further into it. We thought it would be probably a good idea to at least throw out the fact that the district has been very proactive. They have an adopted budget policy. It was put together in December 2020. It was adopted by the board at that time. And I took just the excerpt related to the board of directors' responsibilities to the district. And frankly, they're quite daunting because you basically have to carry on the district of the mission. And let's face it, it's a lot of work, taking into consideration the balancing act between our ratepayers and making the utility financially healthy. So I appreciate all the fact that you put so much effort into it and making sure that we continue to be a healthy organization. This is basically taking the highest level look at our budget. It's what I call the budget summary, and then we'll dig down into some of the more granular levels as we go through it. But first off, take a look at our actuals for 21-22, and you can see that our total revenues were $34.3 million for 21-22. We did increase our budget last year slightly to $35.4, and we then, this year, had another actuals of doing better than that, where we're at 44.9. We'll get into that to explain. It's not on operating revenues, but we had some good fortune this past year. And the good fortune is we had a settlement that was over $10 million settlement, a lawsuit settlement, and that we did a really outstanding job in investing the earnings of in our long-term investment program and short-term investment program. to increased interest income. So we had some very good news this past year. Our proposed budget is looking very close to a budget. If you look at current budget 22-23 to proposed budget 23-24, there's a lot of similarity between it. The operating revenues are going up slightly, and then our non-operating revenues are going up slightly too, and that's primarily because of the interest income. We're again projecting that we're going to do a fine job because interest rates are remaining high. As far as on the expenditure side, if we take a look at our current budget for 22-23, I think it's very important to note that on the capital improvement program this past year, we had budgeted $31 million. If you take a look at the reserve transfer to from of $29.2 million, that's basically telling you that in our CIP program that we put together, we're drawing down most of that money. 29.2 of that out of the 31 million is coming from the reserves. So it's not coming from general operations. General operations does not have the sufficient funds in order to make that. So we're funding a lot of it out of our reserves. Looking forward to our proposed budget for the 23-24, same thing. Our capital improvement program is $27.8 million for new projects. 24.5 is coming from our reserves. Now that's not necessarily bad because, as you know, we're doing a lot of expansion in the district, and a lot of the reserve work we're doing is in that area. So we're doing it with our capacity funds that we have, and then in addition, we have the Romer project that we're working on. So a lot of activity going on. We wanted to dig down and take a look at our operating revenues at a more detailed level. First off, we have our water sales. That's the actual commodity that we're selling. And if we take a look at our actual 21-22, we had $20.1 million of water sales. Our current budget for 22-23 was 19.7. So it was a slight decrease. That's due to the fact that there's conservation going on. And with that, we're seeing that impact our bottom line. Our actuals are 15.8, and frankly, we're not going to meet the target by the end of the year. And it's, we all know that we had a very wet year, 54 inches of rain this past year, and so that's had a definitely impact on the people doing their outside watering. So it's impacted our bottom line. We anticipated that we'll come in more at 17.8 at the end of the year for our water sales, and that's based upon the budget that we have for the last month, and it's just one of the impacts we have. And this is a very key critical thing that we have to take a look at in the future. At the point in time when we do look at doing a rate study, we should evaluate the possibility of going and switching some of the water sales into the monthly service charge. Right now, the way that the district is handling it is we have very little of our fixed costs going into the monthly service charges. Typically, a lot of the utilities that we're looking at nowadays are between 40 and 45% of their revenues are coming from fixed charges. We're more in the 30% range. And so what that means, we're more dependent upon selling water. They're more dependent upon providing the infrastructure for the customer to have the water. And so we have that small distinction. Later on, when we get into that in future sessions, we'll talk about benchmarking of other utilities so you can see actually what they're doing. It gives you kind of a perspective of where we're at. We're doing in the way it's been done in the years past. We should probably take a look at some of the current trends that are now going on. So bottom line, for our proposed budget for this year, 23-24, our total revenue is 32.3. It's very similar to our 31.8 the prior year, so there's not a lot of changes. The assumptions that we use in our water sales, we took it from our water rate consultant, Raftellus. They projected that we're going to have about a 2% increase in sales, but we're also going to have some people doing more conservation, and then coupled with the new people that are coming online. So you can see it's almost a break even, 19.7 versus 19.6. So it's relatively the same. So all in all, we're pretty much the same as far as our operating revenues when you compare year to year. The next item is our non-operating revenues, and we have some good stories we talked a little bit about already, but before we focus on that, if you go back to look at it, the actuals for 21-22, there's a red negative 1.8 million. And on its surface, it kind of looks bad, and at that point in time it was. But that was a case where we had a temporary loss on the value of our investments. The investments that the district held ended up being worth less than what we purchased them for. In the accounting world, if at the end of the year your investments are worth less than what you pay for, you have to recognize a loss on your books. This loss was really a temporary loss, and one that as the value of the investments have increased, because of the interest rate increase, that loss is gone. It's disappeared. So that was just a one-time snapshot at that point in time. So that's a good sign. But I do think you should know that we had it, that situation is gone. In that year, 21-22, even though we had a loss on the investments on the book, we still made about $300,000 in interest income. So there wasn't a loss. Really, it was just that moment in time. In looking at our current budget, we did the same thing. We assessed that we would make $300,000. But because of the great good fortune of the interest rates rising, we seized upon that opportunity. And at this point, we're at about $3.1 million for the 11-month period. We're earning about at a rate of $275,000 a month in interest income because of the investments. This whole thing came about as a result of Jose and Gus and myself going to a CSMFO training session. In the training session was a financial advisor. That financial advisor told us about some of the tips and tricks and techniques that are now being employed by other districts. And we came back and we put our heads together and we contacted our financial advisor and we put together a program that mimicked what he suggested. So our good fortune is a result of sitting on a training session and then taking that back and putting it into practice. This year we've also put in $2 million in our budget for it. That's a little bit conservative. We might do better than that. I think we will. But a lot of it depends on how fast we draw down our CIP money. Because when you take money out of the reserves, it's not being invested in an investment. It's being put into infrastructure. So we're in that kind of a mode at this point. So we put $2 million in. We still think that's very healthy and a lot better than $300,000. So we've done a really outstanding job. We see our property taxes are remaining relatively the same. We also are getting our regular reimbursements about the same. And as I mentioned before, if you see the end of the $11.4 million, that includes the settlement of $10.4 million that the district got earlier in the year. So that was a one-time benefit, and it's a testimonial to the board for moving ahead and going into that settlement process and coming out smelling like a rose. It was really an outstanding effort. In putting together the budget, we also have to take into consideration the debt service that we have. Each year, we have to report back to the bond agent and the legal counsel that we work with that we're meeting the bond debt requirement. There's a ratio that we have to hold as a minimum or we're out of compliance. And that ratio is here where you have the net revenue divided by the annual bond payment. If that number falls below 1.2, then we're in default on our bonds. And so luckily to say we're way above water on that. Our actuals for 21-22 is 5.7. Our current budget, we're doing at 2.9, and our proposed budget, partly because of the fact we've got that additional interest in, up to 5.2 million. 2 million of that is related to the interest income that we're going to be earning this year. We're going to be at 4, so that's really outstanding. A word of caution, though, we have to look at is 2 years from now, when the Romer's totally built out, remember that state revolving loan that we have? That will then be part of this debt schedule, and that's going to add about a $2 million debt requirement payment on an annual basis. Jose and I did a calculation today, and we're still going to be above the minimum required. So we don't have to worry based upon our ongoing debt requirement in the future. So I feel good that we're following the requirements of the debt covenant agreements. We thought it'd be interesting for you to see the breakout of how the 23-24 budgeted operating expenses are. It's a total of 32.5. We spread it by the different departments so that you can see where the money's spent. The biggest chunk of it, of course, is in operations. That's taking care of all the maintenance and all the other ongoing operations, including the meter reading. So it's 56% of the deal. The other organizations are much smaller in nature. The administration, I think we need to talk about just for a second. Administration is kind of a misnomer because it includes the board, it includes IT, it includes HR, it includes the admin office, and then our unfunded pensions and benefits, those costs are also flowing into that. So administration is kind of being used as a catch-all because it has a number of different functions embedded in it, but it accounts for 21% of the total cost. Breaking down those operating costs, we wanted to take it into both the division and then the actual function so you could see how that money is being spent. The budget for this year, proposed budget, is $32.5 million. If you compare that to our budget from the prior year, 31.6, we're talking a 2.5% increase. So in total, budget to budget, it's not a very extensive increase. If you highlight the 3 areas that I put on this particular slide, that accounts for $743,000 of the $806,000. So those 3 particular areas are the areas where that increase is. Keep in mind that even though we have a 2.5% increase, that accounts for the fact that there are increases in labor, increases in benefit, increases in power costs, increases in chemical costs. We have a lot of different increases, and you think about the fact that the district went through these challenge sessions, we got it down to that small increase of only 2.5%. So it really, I think, is a testimonial that we're trying to tighten our belt to the best extent possible. We wanted to share with you the positions. The total number of full-time positions in the district has remained relatively constant going back to 2019. We do have 2 part-timers. There are 2 different interns. One is in the GIS area and budgeted for the public affairs area. So there are 2 of them budgeted in this upcoming budget, each at $1,000. The hourly wage rate is around $21 an hour, to give you an idea of what we're talking about. We wanted to also share with you the fact that we do have, even though we have 89 approved positions, we do have 9 that are vacant at this point. And there's been various reasons for vacancies. Some positions are hard to fill. Others, there's been a determination that we're going to hold it and then reassess it at a point in time. Right now, of those 9, 5 of them are already out for recruitment. So I think that's a great sign. Some of them still need to be pushed along, and I think there's further discussion that we need to have in that area. After taking a look at the budget itself, one of the things that it's best practice is to do a forecast and kind of see where we're going to be in the future. Nobody has a crystal ball, but we do have the benefit of assumptions that have been provided by Raftellus. We also know what our potential labor rate increases and benefit rate increases are going to be over time. So we've done some projections to kind of give you a sense of what it might look like in the future based upon where we're at today. So our proposed budget for this year, 2024, our operating revenues versus our operating expenses are almost a push. We're going to be at a $41,000 net positive position. Our non-operating revenues, that's the net between the operating revenues and expenses, and that's because of the interest income and other different revenues that we generate through reimbursements, is going to be at $4 million. So this year our income loss, we're going to actually be above water by $4.4 million. I told myself I wouldn't say we'd be above water, so I apologize. Going back and taking a look at the forecast for 25 through 28, we're actually seeing a deterioration as costs continue to creep up. You know, each year we're putting in escalators for labor as well as other costs, power and chemicals. Those things go up, but right now, because of the fact that our operating revenues are remaining at a fairly constant rate, we are getting new connections, but then it's also has conservation coming into play. Our revenues are pretty much moving up very, very little. Our expenses are going up a little bit faster, and so what you're seeing is a deterioration that takes place. So when you see red in these out years, and it continues to get worse, if we continue to leave our revenues in a standstill basis, it will tell us that we're going to end up having, you know, some financial difficulties that we're going to have to deal with. Our non-operating revenues are continuing to remain relatively constant, but even going out to 2028, it tells you at that point our non-operating revenues are in fact not even able to encompass and overcome the operating income loss. So this is an area that we need to have further discussions, I think, on how we handle some of our out years. I mean, tonight we're focusing on our budget, getting it through, but we also have some initiatives that we plan on bringing to the board for your review and consideration and later. The next element of our budget we'll be talking about is our capital budget. Our capital budget is really into three different major categories. We have our capacity infrastructure. That's the build out because our district is growing and it's going to continue to grow for a considerable period of time. In talking to engineering, some of the projections, you know, we might experience at full build out about a 25% growth. So we have a lot of growing to do, and it's going to take a few years to get there, but this district's going to be bigger and better than it was before. Our second area is our CIP projects, and those are a big part of it, taking care of our existing system, making sure that it's sound and meeting the needs of our current needs as well as our future needs. And the third and last, infrastructure. And I should say our major pieces of equipment. We wanted to share with you what our capital improvement projects look like for the upcoming year. The way the board policy currently shows is that carryover projects by definition are projects that were budgeted in the prior year but have not been totally completed. The dollars that reflect on these carryover projects are the remaining state spending in the current year. That doesn't mean that that project will be completed in the current year, because a project might take 2 or 3 or 4 years to complete. But this is what we've projected in the upcoming year to be spent. The board has already in prior years approved $52.6 million of carryover budget. Those monies have been earmarked. The reserves have been set aside for those particular projects. The new requests are items that are going to be coming up, and this year we've come up with $27.8 million. And the state revolving fund money that we're going to be using on the Romer project, you can see is the lion's share of it at 20.6. So when you add the whole thing, it's a pretty big number. All I can say is we got a lot of work to do in this upcoming year. On the carryover projects, we wanted to give you the details on those so you can reacquaint yourself, because it's been a long time since you've probably seen some of them. But we listed the top 10 of those projects, considering we have a total of 28, but if you take the top 10, that accounts for 92% of the dollars. The largest one is our Romer project, and so you can see that's at 22%. That alone is, a substantial portion of it. It is 42% of that total pie. So that's a huge one that we're working on. But there's a lot of other projects that you're familiar with, you've already seen come before you. And these are ones that are in process of being addressed. And we hope that many of them get further down the road this year and hopefully completed. So we talked about the carryover. Now we're going to talk about the new ones. And the new requests are $27.8 million, and they fall into three categories: replacement assets, new assets, and then capital outlay for the total of the $27.8. So that $27.8 million's been put here on a project-by-project basis for you. There's a total of 29 projects that we have on the books. The top 10 projects account for 97% of it, and the top one is our Romer project, expansion of almost $21 million. So there's a lot of good work that's being planned. Some work is going to be very easy to get completed in this upcoming year, and some of it may end up taking another year to get completed. I know in our Romer plant that's anticipated to be completed in 25, so it's not going to be all done this year, but we definitely will get a lot accomplished. And I really think Linda and her team have done an outstanding job to date. And I want to also say that the financing that we got for this project at 1.1% is really an outstanding accomplishment, and we're all very proud, and I know the board's very proud of the work that's been done by staff in making that happen. In taking a look at our 5-year capital project, when you look at that 80.4, it's huge because of the carryover projects that have already been approved. And as just kind of as a sidebar, I went back and took a look. Last year in our budget, it was at $38 million was our carry forward. So it does go year by year. The prior year that was, I think, like 28, and then it was 18. So it depends upon a lot of things, such as how fast we can get our plans approved, how fast we can get our bidding done on our contractors. Is there going to be rain delays? Or there's a number of different factors that we have to deal with. Our best goal is to try to get as much of this accomplished and have this backlog, if you will, carryover backlog reduced. I do think that the engineering needs to get those we have 2 outstanding engineering positions, and we got to really get those on board to help get through these projects because we got a lot on our plate. As we go out in the outer years, you can see that there's less projects that have been budgeted, and as you well know, each year we take a look at these, and as the district needs change, these project levels will change. So nothing's really set in stone. In one year, something we find be reprioritized to another year, or may find that it's no longer necessary. But as we go and look at this again next year, these numbers will again change. Wanted to share with you just a moment about the reserve policy. This is an area where we think that we probably need to do some additional work as a district. Jose and myself have been doing some research, and we feel that the current policy we have in place is probably a little bit more fiscally conservative than what we're seeing in other districts, and we're planning on next week to go to the policy committee and open up discussion on that. And we also are going to stop with the finance committee and have some discussions, because we feel that currently at the current 365 days of cash requirement is quite onerous, and it's hand tying the district ultimately by having such a high reserve requirement, which is about twice what other utilities have, is causing you in the long run going to have to raise your rates much higher than you would otherwise when we get to that point in time. So we feel that it's beneficial to be in line with best practice, and so we're definitely going to recommend that down the road. We're going to give you some benchmarking, and we're going to show what best practices are so that you can feel comfortable that I think the conservative approach in the past was wonderful, but it's very hard to achieve and maintain. So we want to be in line with what others are. We're not suggesting not have any reserves, but we're saying that we need the right amount of reserves based upon our operation. So our reserves are basically done into what are called different types of buckets. We have the liquidity funds, and as you know, we have an operating fund that we handle our general operations from, and then we have emergency funds in the event something were to happen. And ultimately, in that particular pot of money right now, we have about $32.5 million set aside in that liquidity fund operation. So we have money set aside to meet those needs. We also have capital funds that set aside in our capital replacement fund area, and at this point we have about $15 million set aside in that particular pot of money. And then we have restricted funds, and I got to tell you, I didn't get a chance to compute that number, but that's the money that's been set aside for our capital improvement programs through the expansion that we're doing. So that money is set aside and earmarked, and we can't touch it unless it's used for the capacity expansion part of the district. We thought it'd be beneficial to take a look going back in time what our restricted and unrestricted reserves look like, so you could kind of see what's been happening to the district. And if you go back to 2018-19, it's $40.8 million, and it's really chugged along to 21-22, and it's resulting because of the money that we collected through the capacity fees. So that those developer fees that we collected money on, that's basically the green part of those slides. And so that money's been collected, and as we do the work, that money's being drawn down. So for 22-23, we're forecasting at the end of the year to be $95.5 million. But as we're doing the work, the capital improvement projects, you can see that money's going away. So it's going to flop down, and we think by the end of 23-24, at the end of that period of time, it'll be around $10 million. So that's basically an ebb and flow that's taking place. As you can see, that we're relatively constant in our unrestricted reserves. So we're maintaining good reserve levels in that area. But the other area, because of the expansion, that's an area that has gone up, and as we continue to expand, that number is going to go down. So we talked a little bit earlier about our reserve policy of the 365 days versus the 185 days. We wanted to share that with you right now. If we take a look at the 365-day level, that's that top green line that's going across. So if you see it by year, that's the level of reserve that we should be saving based on current policy. And we think that policy is way too conservative, requiring you to carry much more cash on hand than you need for a utility your size. Going down to the area that of the 185 level, which was recommended by our consultant with Raftellus to be in line with current industry practice, you're seeing that we're in pretty good shape through 26, and then in 27 we're beginning to have a problem. So that again is reflection on the fact that we're going to have to evaluate taking some sort of rate action in the future. Now, this slide is not what I call the prettiest slide I've ever seen in my life, but this slide has a little bit of a bad news story to it. And the good news is you can see that our unrestricted reserves are relatively flat for the next 3 years, but going out into year 4, which we saw before, that means it's going down a little bit, and in year 5 it's going down even more. So it's indicative of the fact that we're going to have to take some future actions. The area that's underneath, where you see that white line and you see the numbers in negative, that's some of the additional capacity build-out that's going to be happening in the district. Based upon our current projections of additional work that's going to be required, and that's assuming that the build-out's going to occur like we believe it'll be, it's telling us that we don't have enough money. And that means that we're going to have to look at alternative ways to fund that difference that we have. And so how are we going to do that? We may have to revisit our study that we did a couple years back and see if that's still in effect the right rates, because we don't have enough money based upon that. We may have to look at doing some additional bonding to take care of the capacity build out. We also want to take a look at it and push very hard on possible grant opportunities, earmarks, appropriations. We have to take a look at every possible revenue source that we can to help close any gap that we have. So I think that we got some work ahead of us. We got some breathing room right now, but we got to jump on these things in the relatively near future. So finally, every time you do a budget, you have to not only tell you about what the budget looks like, but there's a lot of homework for us. And we wanted to go through just briefly a couple of the items. We already initiated a study, water rate study, and long-range financial plan. That's something that we have to continue to take a look at and make some decisions on it. We also, as we deal with our projects on an ongoing basis, we have to decide how we're going to fund things in the future. We may end up having to look at doing some additional bonding. We may end up having to, and I put down below grants, earmarks, and appropriations. We really got to push the heck out of that. We have to push our people that are helping us, our legislative folks, to really reach out and work hard. And you as board members, if you got connections, we need you to push to. Really important. It's important for us to make sure that we stay financially healthy and meet the reserve target levels. So we're balancing a bunch of balls all at one time. Some of the internal efforts that we're doing is we're going to be undertaking a cost of service study for grants and chargebacks. I'll briefly discuss that so you kind of have an idea of what it's about. Right now, when we do any kind of grant or chargeback work, we're charging basically our labor rate and our benefit rate, and that's it. But under federal law, you have the ability, if you do the proper study in compliance with the government regulations, that you can do what's called a full cost of service on your particular work activity. So what you do is you're adding basically different parts of the overhead of the operation and adding it onto your labor rate. But it has to be done in method that's allowed by the federal government, and it has to be done by somebody that knows what they're doing. I've gone through this a few times in my past. There are consultants that specialize in this type of activity. It's going to cost between $25,000 and $30,000, but it'll save a lot of money. Because every time we do work on our grants in the future, anytime we're doing work for customers, we'll have the right rate to charge. Because right now we're not recovering our full cost. So this is something they'll work on. Is it a home run? No, it's not a home run, but it is going to make money for us. The second thing we want to do is take a look at how we allow customers to pay our bills. We want to provide as many free options to the customers as possible, but if there is something that is costing the district money, we want to be able to make sure that if the customer wants something that's outside the norm, that they're going to pay for that convenience. For example, many utilities are already doing it. If you want to pay by credit card, there's usually a $2.50 charge. We have to look at the fact that we're absorbing that. If you talk about taking a look at a potential rate adjustment, that's a way to help reduce the rate adjustment by taking into account and getting rid of that type of a fee that we're now burdening to collect the money from the customer. So we're looking at that. Finance is looking at every aspect like that. The other thing that we've talked about last board meeting was the fact that we're involved in looking at regional, national negotiated contracts. There are consortiums out there that when you're going out to do any kind of bidding, there's rates that are already established with major companies that are at the lowest possible price. So we want to take a look at that when we're doing our work to see if that's advantageous for us. And at the same time, we do what are called piggyback agreements. So if there's an agreement already in place at another entity, another agency, we can get the same terms and conditions. It's called a piggyback. If you recall at the last meeting, we brought one to you for the fuel. We got the state of California fuel rate. So we did a piggyback on them. We're starting to look at these types of activities because basically they're saving money. The more money we save on that end, the less revenue that we have to increase. So it's basically working smarter. One thing that was brought up in our finance committee session was to do a fleet assessment on the CARB. We're going to take a look at that because there may be some advantageous positions by buying something early than wait because of the fact that we can save money in the long run by doing that. And that's an assessment that President Young mentioned to us, and we're going to undertake that initiative. I think is a really outstanding item. And then an item that's come up that we're going to be looking at too is the sponsorship and donation funding policy. Right now, the structure that's now being handled isn't as tight and as maybe compliant with other agencies and the way that I've seen in other operations. One of the things that came out is it's already been shared, and we've put Jeff on it already. We've asked Jeff to help us make sure that we put together a policy that will be good, that will make sure that the district's mission is being, when we enter in and we do any kind of sponsorships and donations, that our mission for our organization is a big part of it. In order to be compliant and have that available, we have to make sure that there's a nexus between what we give and there's a benefit to the district on the other end. Jeff has provided us some information already on it, so we're on that assignment. That'll be coming through as a policy. We want to make sure that we want to be generous to the best of our ability to our members of our community because we know that creates goodwill, and we want to make sure that our ratepayers think of us as a top-notch organization. So we're going to take that all into consideration, come back with some options for you to look at, and we'll have something that will be workable, and there will be a process in place so that everyone's treated fairly. So with that, we're open to any kind of questions you might have.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. I do want to thank you, Jose, and the entire finance and accounting team for putting together, I think, an excellent budget. I know Dan and I have to kind of dive into this already a bit before the rest of the board, but I do want to thank you. I want to thank all the managers, everybody for all your hard work. This is a lot of work. We know that, and we do really appreciate that. I do have a couple questions, but I will let other board members ask maybe any questions you guys have first. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I want to also thank the staff, Bill and Jose, for the work in putting together this budget, and we appreciate the summary of the budget, which allows us to really get a grasp of the thinking and rationale that's really the management team has put together here. Also, it gives the tale of the story, right, of what has kind of transpired over the last few years, and and some of the belt tightening we had to do, and how it's yielded some levels of result. And I want to really thank President Young for his leadership out of the Finance Committee over the last few years. We are almost like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, or Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. And you know, we may not be conservative on everything, but we do like to pinch pennies together. And he's led the charge, and I usually just go with it. And so government at least works here at West Valley a little bit. I did have a few questions kind of going back to your I guess as I understand it, with Prop 218 in our process here, I thought we began the process at the beginning of this year, in the last year. Where are we with?
Well, you want to answer?
I can try to answer that. The Prop 218 noticing process will take place after we go through the hearing process on the water rate study and long-term financial plan.
Okay.
When it gets to that point, prior to the 218 process actually starting, we're going to end up doing public outreach sessions,
Right.
and make sure that it's thoroughly vetted. First coming to the board, then once the board's happy with that, then we'll go out and have outreach sessions.
Where are we in the process then?
We're on a temporary hold at this point. We anticipate that we'll be moving forward if that's the board's direction. The next step in the process would be to we have a few cleanup items to go through to the Finance Committee. There was some questions that they've had. The next step after that, after they're happy with the result, will be a board workshop. That workshop will be kind of like the budget workshops you do, where you're going to have an opportunity to ask a lot of questions. You're going to see a lot of the assumptions that go into a study. Once you're happy with that, then we go to the public outreach for public input.
Well, can I just maybe
Yeah, go
add
ahead.
in? So at this phase, we got the kind of the draft report from Raftalis to the committee, and so we had some questions which we sent back to kind of staff. So that's kind of where we are in the process. So as Bill said, that they're going to bring some items back to us, but eventually we do have to bring it to the full board for discussion as far as what direction do we want to head towards, because we don't necessarily maybe need to go towards changing the rates for like right now or within the next year or so. But as Bill said, we're kind of looking at needing to do that probably in the first in a few years out.
Right.
But we obviously have to have a discussion and follow the 218 process, but we haven't
Right.
gone to, I think, far enough down that road yet. But I mean,
Well,
I don't know if
yeah, that's
maybe
kind of
legal counsel
Well, yeah, and that's
speak to that.
exactly
Yeah.
where I was going
Yeah.
with this. I appreciate the update regarding where we are with that. So, my only question is, and I do think, you all have gotten the first bite at the apple with that, and are, like most things, putting together a good committee and having a good exchange and communication between the staff and the board members in the committee of jurisdiction. I would ask that Jeff, if you could please have a look at the process. I'm not sure where we are in our window of requirement as far as getting something completed.
Sure.
Can't tell you off the top of my head, but just that timeline when we have to get that done. I just want to make sure we stay within the window we're supposed to stay within. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not saying that we need to do anything to expedite anything or anything of that nature. I'm just saying take a look at that, and I'm asking in that regard because I know we're in a disadvantaged community. There's a lot of seniors, a lot of individuals who are struggling with the cost of living all the way around and inflation. So I understand the concern, particularly in my district and yours as well. Particularly, you got the lion's share of Bloomington. With any view of what rates should look like, but however, at the same time, I want to ensure that we're doing everything to comply with the state requirements, and so that's all I'm gonna say about that for the moment.
Can I just intercede?
Yeah.
Jeff's already done an introduction
Right.
with me and Jose and John. He has an attorney on staff that's a 218 expert,
Yeah.
and we've already made connections with them, and so we're circling the wagon on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may,
Yes. Definitely.
we're not in the middle of the 218 process.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to be concerned.
Microphone, yeah.
It's green. We're not in the middle of the 218 process at all. So there's no clock ticking. The first step is to do a cost of service study, because if you don't have a good cost of service study, then your rates could be subject to challenge later. So the cost of
Right.
service study isn't, hey, these are what your rates should be. It's these are your costs and these are your revenues, and this is how it fits together. That's all where you are right now. You're not into proposed rates. You're not into going out to the public with a rate increase. You're only at the cost of service study, but it's a critical part, but there's no deadline or time ticking on that. Once that cost of services is done and you're comfortable with that, then we move to perhaps to proposed rates,
Right.
public outreach.
Right. But in regard to what I'm not, like I said, there's like a 10-year requirement for something I heard. I don't know what there's a 10-year requirement for.
Well, I believe that is that, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
Bill, but there is a kind of a requirement that we have to do a rate study once every 10 years, which is what we've been.
I'm not aware
Right.
of that as
So-
a specific.
I don't, again, I'm not asking so much for a response right now, because I don't think that's really what I'm asking for is a response right now. I'm just asking for
That we keep a focus on.
Yeah, like there's a review and a discussion. It sounds like the team is starting to have that communication, and that's very appropriate, and I trust that communication. I just want to make sure that the timelines that we have, right, that, everybody has a firm understanding, and as long as that's good, then, that's the end of my inquiry about the topic right now, if that makes sense.
We'll certainly keep a focus on it.
Yeah, because, something's asked in like a month or two or something. Okay, and then,
Your other question? Anything?
yeah, the capacity charges. I know one of the issues with the fiscal shape of the agency is not just, looking at rates from the ratepayer level, but capacity charges and that aspect of it. Can you get more into kind of where we stand with that piece of it?
Well, I'm not an expert in that area. I know that Linda's had more experience with that. She was involved with the consultant. But what I can tell you is, based upon the projections of what we think the build out is versus what we've collected, down the road there's going to be a deficiency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just wanted to, so make sure I'm checking down my list. 218 capacity charges, and then the other is with the convenience fee. I know you talked about it a little bit, but where is this convenience fee? Where, how often do the ratepayers kind of use that? Where is that coming from?
It's a good question. What we plan on doing is coming forward to the Finance Committee and then the full board, looking at each type of fee, because there's different types of fees. For doing processing online, when you pay your bill online, we get charged a fee for doing that. Also, if you pay by credit card, we get charged the bill for that. So certain types of transactions, we're going to pinpoint each transaction, tell you how much, how many are doing it, so you have a good feel of what that annual cost is of each type of the fee. From there, we may leave some stuff alone. We have a company, and I don't remember the company's name, but we have a company where people go to pay their water bill.
Oh, it's 7-Eleven and
What's the
all
name of
that
it?
kind of stuff.
Pay Near Me. Okay.
Yeah.
And we don't anticipate making a change there. We feel that that's a valuable service for certain people, certain segment of our population. But there are other types of fees that we feel a little bit more strongly about. And we've looked at other water districts as well as other cities, how they handle these types of charges. And we see that there's an opportunity that we might be able to save $300,000 or $400,000 a year. So I think that's big enough money that we ought to look at it. You can say yeah or no, but I think we look at it, and then you guys will make a decision.
Yeah.
President Young, I believe Director Garcia
Yes,
has a raised hand.
I saw. I was just trying
I
not
have
to
one
interrupt.
last, I have one last question. Sorry, the gentleman from the 4th District reserves his
Okay.
time. One last question regarding the change to the reserve policy. Before you mentioned it, I did already note that a lot of places, they do it either on a percentage of budget, and then the alternative is 180 days. I do look forward to that review and what that entails, because obviously that's a way for us to
Yeah, it's one of the
offset.
things which was part of that report, and they did look at some neighboring jurisdictions as well. And I agree, it's something we probably need to dig a little deeper on.
Yeah, that was very valuable for Raftellus to give us that information, because it made us go back and do some
digging.
checking. Yeah,
Right, because in all the, like I said, the rate study or P218, I'm not gonna say it no more. The reserve policy, the capacity charges, convenience fee, that's 180. The reserve policy, that mix kind of being looked at simultaneously, and some degree, not in the short term would be helpful, so we could align the decision making in a way that allows us to be able to provide the service at the levels we need to without burdening individual rate customers. And so I do understand the overall of this presentation, but I just want to make sure, that I'm, as a board member, reflecting and giving you some of the things that I'm going to look at and hope that we're able to get some guidance on in the short term.
I think you make a very good point. We as staff try to find as many ways that we can to soften any kind of blow that will happen in the future as far as any rate adjustments. And we're looking at best practices at other districts. And if we can take a page from somebody else's playbook, we're going to do that and bring it forth to you for your review and hopefully your approval.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Okay. Before I call on Angie, I just wanted to kind of add a little point of information for our newer board members in regards to the capacity charges. Channing and I were both on the board a few years back when we actually made the decision to increase our capacity charges, and it was a bit of a heated discussion at the time, and the argument on the other side of it was we have these record reserves, why do we need to raise them? But I think Bill's presentation perfectly illustrates that even though we had record reserves, the cost of replacing those assets today or in future dollars is not sufficient enough, even with the fact that we had these $100 million reserve. at that particular moment in time. So even though we took action even a couple of years ago, then you had COVID and everything else, supply chain shortages. So even with that increase, we probably didn't raise it enough, honestly, even now. So I do want to point that out for our newer board members who weren't here at that time at that discussion, because there was a lot of contention about why are we raising capacity charges when we have record-setting reserves. Well, this is exactly why, because you collect the money in 1 year, but then you outlay it 5-6 years later at a different cost. And so I did want to kind of piggyback on what Channing brought up there, because I think it's good for the newer members to understand that we kind of had a debate on that a few years back, but it looks like we may even have to revisit it again just because of the cost of electricity, labor, and materials at this point.
I think that's a very good idea,
Yeah.
President Young, to possibly revisit. In defense of that study, though, I think at that time it was a well-done study.
No,
but times have
I agree.
changed.
I agree, but the whole world ended in that meantime.
Well, one good thing that I will say, that, and this is an idea that Jose thought of, and I loved it, and we did it. The interest that we earn off the capacity charge reserves, we're adding that back into the capacity charge reserve category. So it's not going into general operations. So those reserves, we're doing our very best to build it. And when he came to me with this idea, I said, that's brilliant. And so that's what we're doing. So hats off to Jose for that.
Yeah, excellent thought. All right, Angie, I know you patiently had your hand up there. Go ahead.
Well, let me mute myself. Well, I do want to say thank you for that presentation. It was very detailed, but if anything, it did bring up some slides where, you see a lot of reds that in my mind are in the negative. If you can go back to slide 13, please.
I think you need to go forward, please.
Yeah, we had slightly different numbers.
It'll be
on
slide
this.
19, yeah. We had to read.
No, yes, there you go. So if I'm understanding this 5-year outlook, it seems that we will start being in the negative as of 2025 and then incrementally increasing thereafter. And then we're going to have additional loss in income starting in 2028. Is that correct?
Yeah. When you take a look at the forecast from 25 through 28, what you are seeing is that if we hold the operating revenues, and that's basically the rates that we charge our customers the same, you're going to experiencing a operating loss starting in 2025 of almost $2 million. What that tells you is that we have to do two things. One, we need to take a look at, do we make an adjustment in the revenue levels? And two, does the district as a whole have to further tighten its belt? So those are two things you have to take a look at. One, because it's not necessarily just one answer, but we do have to look at both of those. So that kind of tells you that that's a more eminent position than we thought. The breathing room you do have is if you opt to not take as much action, you do have an overall bottom line net income. But what happens is you're basically providing your product to our ratepayers at a loss. We're not actually making. If we were a business enterprise, we would be selling it at a loss. So we have to kind of evaluate that very closely, and it's an excellent point that you bring up, Angela.
So if I'm understanding correctly, we are selling water at a rate that is eventually going to put us at a loss starting next year or in the year 2025.
Well, partially yes, partly no. The partially yes, if we just look at the operating revenue versus operating expenses. We do make money from our interest earnings, and so that is basically saving the day for us. But if we end up having a downturn in the interest rates, we could end up in a situation where we would experience a loss much sooner.
Wait, so that's inflation is not as bad as people say?
What we're experiencing, in fact, inflation is, we're experiencing it in our cost of operation, our labor cost, as well as our cost for services, electricity, chemicals, everything that we experience, we're paying more for.
But the interest rates
is
as a
helping
result
us.
of they're helping us.
But
Okay.
the one good side effect of it is that it is helping our investment. Now, it is hurting us when it comes to the cost of materials, though,
Yes.
because we're experiencing a negative there. So, in the grand scheme of things, we're probably lucky if we're breaking even between the two, maybe.
So then, Mr. Fox, if I go to slide number 23, it shows us that in between the two, between the slide of number 13, it seems like if we don't make any changes based on our water rates, this slide is telling me that losses for the district are imminent as of 2025.
Your mic's off. Yeah.
We are going to experience losses as early as 2025 if we don't take corrective actions.
Okay. Now, just as a, when I used to live at my previous home, I was within the Fontana Water Company. And, we would get notices that we were going to be getting water increases, but really nobody understood what it meant until you got the first bill. And it was not a 5% increase or 10% increase. It was like an over 20% increase all at once. And then moving forward, it just seemed like the bill wouldn't get lower. And that's what I want to avoid with us. We know that the increases are imminent, but it would be better if we can take a look at what the study is showing us, where we need to be, so that it doesn't happen to what Fontana Water Company did to, that's what I want us to take a look at that, because, I've been asking for this water rate study since last year, and I don't think it's really, I don't know why it would take this long for us to take a look at it to see where we are, so that we can try to avoid what's going to probably happen in 2025.
Yeah, well, can I speak to that, Angie? Again, we just recently got this at the Finance Committee level, so a lot of what you're seeing on these slides is what Bill and his team and Raftelish shared with us. And again, that's why we had a lot of questions. And I echo your concern that we don't want to do any kind of massive increase if we are going to go down the road, which, and I know they actually were presenting us with a couple hypothetical options, even just in the preliminary report, which we were asking for some, maybe reflection on. But even there, we were looking at maybe a 3 or 4 or 5% over many years, possibly. Now, again, this is just their early report. But again, we had questions. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you that I don't think anyone on this board wants to see any large-scale increases, but we are probably looking at a series of smaller increases over time, if in fact that's the road we choose to go down.
I want to chime in with my colleague. That's why we have to kind of look at it as a more of a menu of items, right? There's no set item. This
Correct.
isn't, it's more of a buffet, and we gotta. We don't want to get too excited or exuberant about the need for increases in rates. We just want to review the different tools that we have in order to mitigate any need to increase rates. And so I think the team has laid out close to a dozen, if not a dozen, alternative options, which require overall look at our district, whether it's something from grants, whether it's what we're doing in Sacramento, whether it's internal savings, whether it's looking at the different types of charges. And so I think it may be a little premature to talk about increases in rates when we have a lot of alternatives.
Agreed.
So I'm not saying that there isn't a need for, but Mr. President and Mr. Vice President, I just wanted to, I think I was understanding where you guys were with the presentation before we get into the announcement of any numbers.
Yeah, and I
to
totally
increase
get
any rates.
like this is a bit maybe shocking because again, this is probably the first time you all have seen some of these figures. Again, we just recently got this at the Finance Committee, but I agree with you, Channing, that we have a lot of options before us. We have a little bit of time. It's not like we're hitting a complete drop off next year. We have a couple of years. I mean, not to say that we're going to take our time, but we're going to be deliberate in looking at what the options are, what the law requires us to do. But we probably are going to need to have a discussion as a board, and I'm glad that Bill kind of is bringing this all to your attention, that based on what we just recently got back, it's looking like, and it's really several things are driving it: the cost of electricity, labor, and materials. Those three things are really hamstringing us right now. And we've all kind of seen it just in our own lives. Our Edison bills have gone through the roof. Well, that is hurting the district's bottom line. So while I think all the managers have done a really good job at kind of keeping costs down, keeping things fairly flat, those three areas in particular, and I know Bill's over there just kind of like smiling because him and I have talked about this, those three things are just really saddling us. So if we do end up having, as a board, to make some changes or decisions, it will be largely because of those factors. And obviously, as we look towards a possible 218 process, that will be a big part of our messaging of explaining to people, if we are going to be making changes, whatever those changes may be, these are the factors that are driving the district's need to do that, so that we don't end up in this scenario that we have on the screen right now.
One of the things that we can provide more predictability in our rates is, like I mentioned before, that we shift more into our fixed cost through the meter charge as opposed to having variable cost through the sales of the water. We're losing almost $2 million because we didn't do that kind of a switch earlier. Yeah. So those are things we do, and it doesn't cost any more really, because we're not. The way I see it is, we're providing the same level of service, but we're gonna get a little bit more money than we have already, because everything right now is variable. It's kind of like they go to the gas station and they pay for the gas and that's it, where they're not thinking about the fact that the gas station owner has all these pumps and he has all this equipment and everything else that has to be maintained, and the gas station owner didn't put in the full cost in the gallon of gas that he's selling. We're in that scenario right now, so we got to do some of our shifting of our revenues so that it's more predictable for us, and that will help us. We can do some of that, and that's not going to impact the ratepayer. We did a kind of just a back of the envelope take a look at this, and the average residential customer right now is about $75 a month. Okay. And if you take a look at a 6% rate increase, that's $4.50 a month. So we're not talking about huge dollars. I mean, every dollar counts to people, but a lot of people spend more than that when they go to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee. So the $4.50 isn't that big a deal. And I know you look at the increases in Social Security and some of the other things that have gone on this past year. We're not asking for big money. We just want to have enough money so that we can maintain the operation.
Yes.
And
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to ask if you had more. Or
Well, I do
Yeah.
have more, but
No,
I have-
Angie.
I like the board member Channing, what he said about this is a buffet. I like that. I know that there's a lot of upcoming initiatives that you have brought up, convenience, fee reduction, all these different things that we can come up with where we can see what we can do to lower the amount of losses that it seems that like it's almost imminent, right? But what I would like to see with these initiatives or, possibly studies that are coming is how much will it reduce it when we get to the next, fiscal years. If we, for example, we tackle the convenience fee reduction or we evaluate the reserve level targets, where does that put us if we start tackling some of these initiatives? Because you're right, we haven't had a rate increase at this agency for, can you tell me when was the last year that we did this?
I think it was before I was born.
No, it was. We're about 9 years now. Yeah.
9 years. So a study is really, it doesn't hurt for us to have a study just to see where we're at and what needs to happen. And maybe not much needs to happen, but if we don't have that data to let us figure out where we need to be, we're pretty much going to be shooting in the dark. And I pretty much have been asking for it, and I would really like to see it so we know that we can have a better planning for the next upcoming years.
The way that we did this particular budget, as you know, we didn't anticipate any rate increase. I do think we should be studying this, and I think the sooner that you study it and implement it, you're going to be better off financially. The longer you wait, the bigger cliff you're going to have to climb in the future. In the Raftelis analysis, they showed they called it the do nothing scenario, and the do nothing puts us in a very dire financial situation.
Yeah, the Finance Committee wasn't keen on that option, but we definitely look forward to hearing some of your follow up to a lot of our questions. And I think, to everybody's point, gathering all the relevant information, as you said, especially on where maybe we can secure some possible savings by just changing some of our procedures and processes in-house, so that would hopefully allow us to maybe not have to look at maybe as big of a change as far as rates. So we are in that phase. You guys are working on gathering that information for the Finance Committee, and certainly it's my desire to get it, as we kind of earlier mentioned, probably in a workshop setting as soon as we can, because I agree we definitely need to take a good hard look at this, and the sooner the better, but I definitely want to make sure we have all our ducks in a row before we do that for the full board.
And I just have one last comment. I wanted to refer to slide number 12. And it seems that we have several vacant positions, 9 that are listed full-time positions, with 4 of them being, over 250 days open. I'm just hoping that we're able to now look at which positions are really needed, or we need to do a restructuring of the of our, I'm losing my my train of thought right here. But if we can start looking at how we're going to tackle these vacancies, I know that some of them are over 250 days old, and just, seeing that now that we have a new general manager, that he could take a look at to see which positions are needed, not needed, and start filling them, because I feel that it's too many positions that are open. I do know that there's 2 positions in engineering that need to be backfilled, 2 positions in public affairs, and if you could please start looking at which ones have priority, and then if we can start that process.
Yeah, and Angie, the executive committee has already been talking to John, now that he's here, about prioritizing some of these ones that we either had on hold or we've had some difficulty filling, or we were just mainly waiting for you to get here. So so that is definitely on our priority list as the executive committee, and I know everybody's anxious to get moving on these. So, John, do you have any?
Yeah, we're planning to bring forward an action item on July 6th to revisit that the resolution, I believe, from last year. So that'll help us get to refilling some of these positions that have been vacant for so long. And for every one of these positions, I think we want to take another look at the organization and the structure and make sure this is the right position for the agency at this time.
Can we also ask? You go ahead, Angie.
One last comment about this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so I think that we had a resolution that has a hiring freeze, but it's my, based on the last time I brought it up, it was really going to just be that when we get the new general manager, he would be the one who would take the lead in backfilling the positions, not the executive committee. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct, Angie. And what John is referring to is something which I've already directed, which is it's going to be on our first meeting in July, is to repeal that so that he gets all the full authority that we planned for him to have. So
That's
just,
awesome.
just wasn't
Thank you
able to get it in time until then.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll keep the board
Calvin?
fully informed, after we revisit that resolution. Be assured I'll keep the board informed as to what we're doing with positions and job descriptions and fulfilling positions.
Yeah, and I know you and I and Dan have had quite a few conversations about all these positions. Kelvin, you had something?
Yeah, I'll just ask what I would like to see when you do come back to us with the position control
Yes, sir.
is have, I like the days vacant, but also how, if it's open and it's posted, how many applications do you have on file for each position? Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and the class comp study will help with some of these recruitments for sure.
Yeah. All right. Kelvin, Dan.
I think enough has been said.
Okay, I just have two very quick questions. I know normally I have like 50, but you all have been really good this year. So I just have one.
That's a major compliment right there.
So I do have a question on maintenance, transmission, and distribution 5410. There were a couple items, and I didn't really see any updates, Jose, Bill, but as far as the annual repair and replacement, building grounds repairs, and then the soil compaction and street paving, we kind of overspent ourselves last year on both of those, but yet we're asking for less for this coming year. So are we actually anticipating less paving and less repairs and maintenance? Because to me, the cost of materials and all that alone probably mean that we should probably see a little bit of an increase, if you ask me. But again, I look to you guys as the experts.
Yes, President Young. Basically, the budget that we use here, we're using based on our trending of what we're basically costing now. It all depends on how many leaks we have in a year, so that's going to be dependent on that. I don't know if Joanne has any more input on that, but I believe that's where we're at.
I mean, if you guys are comfortable with it, that's fine. I just want to double check.
And
You feel comfortable?
You think that's good? Okay. All right. That's easy enough. All right. And then my last one was on the CIP. I did have a question, and I know Angie and I actually had quite a discussion on this in engineering, but I see that we budgeted the $600,000 for the Building C improvements that I know both her and I are very much in favor of, but I know the last update we had to the committee, it was a bit higher of a price tag, and so I think you all were kind of going to rethink it, but I never ever heard back on what the plan is. So are we doing less modifications? Because I remember like we were looking more at it like a $7-figure dollar amount based on our initial study on that one.
Linda, do you want to handle that?
Yeah.
Yes, so your direction at committee, we took that and we
Okay.
went back to the architect. So we did get a price for the option that we looked at for the scenario for the offices and spaces out there. But we also asked the architect to take a look to see what it would cost to completely remove the building and start over.
Okay.
We also asked them to take a look if the building was a little taller, maybe we could get some extra space
Okay.
at a minimal price. So we're still waiting to get those numbers.
Okay, but right now we're asking for 600, but that may not be enough then, right?
Correct. Right now, depending which way we go, that is just a placeholder, and
Okay.
we'll come back with a request.
Okay,
when
so
we
what
have
we
them.
may see is maybe like a mid-year adjustment if we decide to move forward with something more.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, just want to be clear about it, because again, when I saw it, I was like, only 600? Because I think we're going to need more than that. Okay. All right, well, those were my questions. Again, like you all did a really good job this year, so I'm very pleased. No other No questions? You sure,
No
sir?
questions, sir.
No questions?
Absolutely not.
All right. Well, I think that's about as good as you're going to get, Bill. I mean, for me not to have like 20
No,
questions.
I have a question.
Oh.
Sorry, Greg.
Oh,
Sorry.
Go,
I
yeah,
didn't
go
see the
ahead,
hand.
Angie. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
No, it's okay.
But for the budget for external affairs, I wanted to request if we can get some additional funding for the water donations. I know that we had some for last year for for like the Little League, and I want to make sure that we have enough for whenever we get water requests for any type of baseball event or Little League event, that we have enough. And I don't know if
So
we
you're
have
talking
enough.
about so you're talking about the sponsorship, not donations. I mean,
No, it's for
sponsorships,
the
right?
water. I think it's the water bottles or
The bottled
something.
water donations.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the page. I'm sorry.
Well, I just know they have different line items in that budget. I don't know if Socorro would want to speak to it, but I know water's one line, and then the community sponsorships is like another line, right, Bill?
That's correct. And,
Yeah.
and what we do plan on doing is that's one of the initiatives that we're undertaking this year. We want to work closely with Jeff and get some guidance on how best to structure the donations and sponsorships. Again, the nexus has to be coming back to show the mission and the benefit to the district as well as to the organization receiving it. And so we don't want to start running afoul of the requirements, and Jeff is going to adeptly help us make sure that we follow the protocols that can do what we want to do and not fall outside the line where we're supposed to be.
I'm trying to find the page here.
I would like to, if at all
think Socorro
possible,
found it.
Angela,
Well,
if we could
Well-
revisit this a little bit more as we develop a policy, and then we can come back with an
Well-
adjustment if necessary.
Well, yeah, let's look at that. I think I want to respect the chair of the committee. We would definitely, in the Public Affairs Committee, want to see any policy impacting the operations of public affairs, whether that's giving or the water programs. And so, I want to defer to the chair of the committee and how we're going to take a look at that and when and where the placement of that would occur. Because I think Director Garcia is the chair. And so, I do share her sentiment of wanting to be able to properly support our community. And so I just wanted to echo that before we got into a detailed conversation regarding any updates in policy, is that, I support the chairwoman in how she views this and the need for us to be able to be appropriate in our community. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I think Ms. Anzalone.
I appreciate. No, I
coming.
appreciate it. Unfortunately, when I'm zooming, I'm trying to look through the papers. But yes, I don't want to limit the amount when we're doing sponsorships for Little League games and requests for water. I just want to be able to have enough money so that we don't run dry.
So it
No
looks,
pun intended.
yeah. So we have Socorro here, Angie, and looking at the budget, it looks like we have $5,000 for water bottles. Is
Correct,
that
President Young. And for the board, it's on page 56 of the packet under second item on the top. So we have $5,000 budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay.
Usually it's 24 bottles per case. We order around 40 per pallet. That'll cover, depending, we get about a sponsorship ask of 20 cases per different organizations or so.
And do we know how much we spent just on water last year, or?
Around 4,000, a little below 5,000, so we're kind of rounded it up.
So okay, all right. How does that sound, Angie? I mean, that's still a little bit of an increase, but I think even to Bill's point, if we need more, we can always give you more in the mid-year. Angie?
I'm thinking.
Oh,
Hold on.
sorry.
Yeah, but Madam Chair, you can definitely, deal with it now, and then I think to echo what the president said, there's some level of flexibility in how all this works.
That's correct.
And so you don't have to have an answer in the moment.
Okay, sounds great. I just
Okay.
want to, there's some items that I think that may need a little bit more cushion, but we can bring it up if needed mid-year because we haven't used it all up.
Yeah.
So we could talk about it later.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or discussion on the budget? Or, oh, yes, sir.
I might add a few comments.
Sure.
There's quite a bit of comments around a 218 and time requirements, that sort of thing. Done quite a few of these. Kind of mentally, it's not a required time frame, but mentally I give it about 6 months to have plenty of time for public out, for workshops, and then the board would approve rates, and when they approve those, it's up to 5 years. They can approve a set of rate increases for up to with a 5-year limit. So that's kind of maybe the time frame you're looking for. And then I believe once the board approves that, there's a 30 or 45-day public notice period before those rates would go into effect. But overall, I like 6 months so we can get out way ahead of it and get out in the community, talk about the needs of the system, and really talk about the needs first, and then you do the rate study. We talked about fixed versus variable rates. The low fixed rate is really problematic. I've seen a lot higher, like double that amount. I think we had in Tahoe was more like 75% was fixed. So certainly finance department really liked that stability. Yeah. But even to make that change, you need to do a rate study and go through the 218 process.
Yeah. And I'll just echo that when Bill and Jose first kind of brought this to the committee, I had a bit of heartburn because I got involved here mainly because of a rate increase, but certainly wanted to make sure that if we do end up having to go down that road, and look, I've even told people for the last several years that, hey, we've kept it flat for a long time. We can't do that forever. But certainly when and if we do embark on that path, over communicate, not just meet the bare minimum requirements by law, because I know that was a bit of angst from some people before, that they felt like not enough was done to communicate what was happening and why. And any more to add to that, or no?
Yeah.
So I just want to echo kind of what you said there. Yeah.
And I just had one more thing. Does the district have like a Helping Hands program to help the lowest income customers with their bills?
I will turn that over to our director of finance there.
Well, I'll tell you, we have programs that are initiated by the state of California. There's funding programs. We ourselves do not have a program where we do it. We end up partnering with the state, as well as the county of San Bernardino has a program that we help our people. We've actually held workshops under Socorro's, held a couple different workshops at different places within our service territory to help the customers do that. We also have a program in place where we have payment plans that give people that are in trouble up to a year to pay. We've also, in cases where they still can't make it, we do a reallocation and give them additional time. But having a separate fund set aside, we would have to study that if we were to go down that path.
Well, and if I could just add one other component, which we were also looking at, which again, we're trying to get some more information on at the committee level, is I know there's been some discussion about different, rate programs maybe for different folks, whether like seniors or low income or veterans. Several board members have raised questions about that, so that was another aspect that we're trying to fine tune as far as what that might look like. And again, looking at all options on how that affects our financial position. But I do want to point out that was also part of what they've been working on and are still working on. Yeah. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. So if there's no more discussion, We have the budget before us. It doesn't sound like it needs to be amended in any way, so if someone is willing to entertain the motion, particularly the 3 staff recommendations that go along with the item, I would appreciate it.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the proposed budget with the 3 staff recommendations that are listed.
Okay, we have a first. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, it's duly first and second.
Thank
Any
you.
discussion?
Sorry. No, I can take a roll call vote.
Yep.
Director Garcia,
Yes.
Director Hawkins,
Yes.
Director Moore,
Yes.
Vice President Jenkins,
Yes.
and President Young.
Yes.
That passes 5-0. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, again, I want to thank all of staff, Bill, Jose, the whole finance team again for all the hard work. Managers, great job. Again, I think this is one of the best budgets I've seen in my years on the board, so I do appreciate that. I do want to make one small addition, kind of off topic, but I know Van isn't here in person, but he's on the Zoom. I did want to acknowledge Van for all his leadership and support to the district. As many people here in the building know, he is going to be leaving us soon. I'm very sad to see him go, but I did want to publicly thank you, Van, for all the leadership and all the hard work you've done. In particular, I do want to point out and highlight publicly that $10.4 million settlement, I don't know if we would have gone that if it hadn't been for your leadership and your connection to the lawyer that helped us get that. So I do want to publicly thank you for that. It was a huge win for this district. And again, I'm very sad to see you go, and I wish you all the best in your new endeavor. I don't know if any other board members would like to also say a few words.
I'll say some words. I know I don't speak up quite often, but Van, thank you for welcoming me to the district, and I will greatly miss you from this organization, and I want you to know that.
Van, I wish you all the best. God's blessings for you. I know you'll be successful whatever you're going to do. And thank you so much for your spirit of kindness and goodness when you were here to me. So thank you for that.
And Van, thank you for your intelligence, your skills, and your leadership during your time here at the agency. We've been very blessed and fortunate to have you here.
Thank you for all the kind words. Greatly appreciate it.
All right. I know we don't have any reports, but
yeah, I would think that you would want to make a report that, and you were in closed session.
Closed session. Okay.
Under 54957.6, comments for the labor negotiators, and I presume there's no reportable action.
Yes, I'll just say that we did meet. We did discuss it pursuant to what's here on the screen, but no final action was taken and direction was given to staff.
Perfect.
So, all right. There's nothing else. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Sir, by the buzzer, sir.
I just wanted to.
I was literally ready to.
Okay.
Let's just point to it. Don't count.
I just wanted to also extend a thank you to Van for all his leadership and help us through the budget process. And also, Gustavo, that's in the back, raise your hand. Gustavo helped us get this all put together too, along with Jose and myself. And I wanted to make sure that you got recognized tonight, Gus, for all your hard work too.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gustavo.
Thank you.
All right. Meeting is adjourned.